All right, should I go ahead and get started?
Yeah,
okay,
thank
great.
you.
Hi, everyone. Oops. Yeah, that works. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Elvisha Dhamala, and I'm a postdoc at Yale University. And today I'm going to be talking a little bit about science communication and specifically focus on how we can use Twitter for science communication. And because this talk is going to be focused on communication, I'm going to try and make it as engaging as possible and try to have more of a discussion with you all about some of these topics. So for that, I encourage you to unmute yourself at any point, shout out your thoughts, questions, or if you'd prefer to type it in the chat instead, that's fine too. I have it open and I'll try to keep up with it. If I do miss anything in it, just let me know and I can always go back. So with that, let's kick it off. In order to understand what science communication is, we first need to understand what science is and what communication is. So let's start with science. Science can mean a lot of different things, and I'm not here to say what is and isn't science. So we're just going to go with a very broad definition of any pure or applied science field, including but not limited to the physical sciences, life sciences, social sciences, health sciences, math, engineering, technology, medicine, and statistics. And the other part of science communication is obviously communication. So communication exists in many different forms, but it generally refers to some sort of information exchange between individuals or groups. So to put those two together, that now leads to science communication. And before I go ahead and try to define it, does anyone have any ideas about what science communication means or what it means to you or what it looks like to you? Feel free to type it in the chat or unmute yourself, whatever you prefer.
I think my biggest impression of science communication is press people from, I guess, the White House and like the advisors for the White House in terms of health. I don't really know much else about science communication, to be honest.
Okay, so that's a great start. What you have organized here today, that is technically science communication. And because, I see someone has said explaining science to non-scientists. So that's also a great point. But these are just very specific examples of something that is much broader. And because it's so broad, it's often hard to define. So this one study from 2003 tried to sort of put it into a more concrete definition. And they came up with this idea that science communication, or SciComm, can be defined as the use of appropriate skills, media, activity, and dialogue to produce one or more of the following personal responses to science. And they came up with an analogy that relates to the different vowels. I see someone else has said, exchanging ideas about how things work, exist, and function. And absolutely, that's definitely included in this as well. So the responses that we're seeking to elicit with science communication can sort of be used to define them. And those responses are awareness, enjoyment, interest, opinions, and understanding. And it's important to recognize that any form of science communication does not have to do all of those things or elicit all of those responses, but it can instead just focus on a single aspect or multiple aspects. So for example, not all science communication will be there to spark enjoyment or interest, but it may specifically be designed to understand specific scientific content or form science-related attitudes. And we define science communication as any form of we define communication as any form of information exchange. And science communication is no exception, but there are specific groups that we need to think about. So I know we've mentioned sort of like White House press people, scientists, non-scientists, all of those are different people that play a role in science communication. So it involves science practitioners, mediators, other members of the general public, and it can be either peer-to-peer or between groups. And when we think about these different groups, scientists can be anyone who's working in academia and industry and government. It can be anyone who's a mediator. So this includes communicators, which includes science communicators who may be working for the White House or for the press, but also just journalists, media professionals, anyone who may be communicating anything related to any form of science at all, as well as educators. So these are teachers, professors, and so on. We also have decision makers. So this also relates to the government aspect, where there are people who use our understanding of science and use it to actually shape policy in either government or scientific and other institutions and organizations. So they're now also thinking about what is the science that we understand and how can we use that to communicate it in a way that actually codifies it into some form of policy or law designed to enhance the functioning of society. And then we also have the general public, which includes all of these other groups, but it also considers people who may already be interested in and well-informed about science and scientific activities, or it could even be someone who doesn't actually care about the science or isn't well-informed at all. So really it covers every single person is in some way partaking in science communication. So we've talked a little bit about what science communication is, but now I'm going to go through a little bit about each of the 5 responses or goals that we hope to elicit with science communication. And first up is awareness, and this is how we can define it. So in the simplest terms, awareness is the lack of ignorance and typically involves some form of conscious acknowledgement of a field, idea, or concept. And in terms of awareness, in a scientific context, we need both awareness and acknowledgement to provide the foundation of our knowledge, broaden our mind, and open up our opportunities that otherwise may not exist. And when we think about awareness, something we need to think about are there are 3 main groups of people that we need to consider. So for each of these groups, awareness will mean something that's very different. First of all, we have individuals who are uninformed or disinterested in the subject topic. Next, we have individuals who are informed and or interested in the subject or topic. And finally, we have individuals who are specialists in the subject or topic. And depending on who you're engaging with and the goals that you're seeking from your communication, you'll need to tailor that communication appropriately so that that information that you're seeking to communicate is actually accessible to all of these individuals and seeking to raise awareness at the level that they are actually going to be able to understand it, but also make the most of it. The second response is enjoyment, and enjoyment exists across 2 levels, which are the superficial and the deeper levels. At a superficial level, enjoyment can be described as a pleasurable experience with science being a form of entertainment or art. So if you watch a science-related movie, that may be a superficial form of enjoyment that you get from that specific science communication. Or we can have a deeper form of enjoyment, which is the enjoyment that's derived from discovering, exploring, presenting, or resolving science-related questions. So if you're taking a chemistry class and you're really interested in how specific classes of molecules are acting and you do a little project on that, that may now lead to a deeper level of enjoyment for you because it's not just someone telling you what's happening, it's much more about yourself being able to explore and understand that process. And typically what ends up happening is if we enjoy science at a superficial level, we might then have more positive feelings and attitudes, which can then lead us to seek a deeper understanding of science and then lead to an understanding at a deeper level, as well as enjoyment at a deeper level. And again, when we're thinking about enjoyment, we also have to think about those 3 audiences that we talked about in awareness. So if you're someone who is very informed about a given topic, you're likely to derive more enjoyment from it than someone who might be uninterested or uninformed. Same thing if you're a specialist, that might be something you do all the time, so you find it really enjoyable. So all of these goals and responses are also very strongly tied to one another. So the third is interest. So I see someone has asked a question about, have you experienced enjoying science like this? So let me just put this slide back up. And for me personally, I, for a long time, knew I wanted to be in the world of science. I wasn't sure exactly in what form. But now I'm at a stage in my career where I get to choose a lot of the research questions that I want to ask. I choose the direction of what I want to work on. So it really helps me figure out, okay, these are things that I care about in life, and this is how I'm actually going to implement that in my science work. So I think for me, it started with understanding some of the things that I'm working on at a superficial level, deciding, okay, that's cool, I enjoy this, and then seeking out how do I actually build a career doing something like this, which has now led to that enjoyment at a deeper level. So thank you for that question. So the third is interest. And voluntary and repeated engagement and involvement with science is generally that should be a strong indicator of interest in science. And what is, let me back up for a second, actually. A strong indicator of science is really important. And I'd argue that it is actually more important than understanding or memorizing scientific content. Because if you don't learn anything at all from today's session, that's fine. But if you're interested enough in this topic to seek out and actually be here, and you're interested enough when you leave this to be like, okay, I want to actually implement this in some aspect of my life, then that's what matters. And that now also ties into what we said about superficial versus deep enjoyment, because you might enjoy, say, the hour of this workshop, but it's an isolated event, so it's pretty superficial. If you instead seek out to then engage in science communication, and actually implement it in your lives, that's more indicative of your interest and likely to also be more rewarding for you. But interest isn't necessarily always enough. And one of the major challenges in science communication is translating that interest into practical outcomes. So we need to make sure that we're channeling and developing our interest in science into practical outcomes that are useful for individuals and for society. So in the case of today's workshop, it's great that you're here and interested in this topic, but I'm more interested in making sure that you leave with the knowledge and the skills and the tools that you need to actually engage in science communication in your own lives, because that's a practical outcome that's not just going to be useful to you, but you can now take that understanding and use it to advance society's understanding of science too, and society's engagement with science. So next up, we have opinions. And an individual's opinion or attitude is a complex, personal, and multifaceted thing that's generally strongly linked with and influenced by knowledge, beliefs, and emotional reactions. And this is perhaps where science communication has had the largest influence, especially in more recent years, especially given all of the ongoing interest in topics related to science, such as COVID. And we're constantly being bombarded with information across so many media forms and platforms. So this is undeniably shaping our individual opinions and perspectives. And because of that, science communication can be thought to directly cause participants to reflect on, form, reform, and affirm their opinions and attitudes pertaining to science and society. And finally, we have understanding. And an understanding of science can be thought of as the comprehension of scientific content and processes. And a crucial goal for science communication is to be able to help individuals, no matter how much they are interested or informed in a given topic, to develop an accurate and accessible understanding of a given scientific topic. So this means to help them develop foundational knowledge that is enough that they understand it to a level so that they can then engage further with the topic and seek a deeper understanding. So again, this ties into everything that we said about awareness, about enjoyment, about interest, and then actually form more concrete opinions about the science and its influence on society. So just as a quick recap, science communication serves to foster awareness, enjoyment, interest, opinions, and understanding. And all of these goals are deeply intertwined and affected by one another. So I've said a lot about what science communication is, but we haven't really talked about what it can look like. Does anyone have any ideas about that? I'll give you a little bit to think about it, and feel free to throw your ideas in the chat. All right, so I can put a few up and that might spark some ideas. So documentaries, books, podcasts are some of the common things that we think of, but what might be some other forms of science communication?
Could seminars and speeches be one?
Absolutely. So I see info days, science fair attempts at public festivals, YouTube channels, TV shows, science articles, manuscripts, media, photos, videos, social media, TikTok, photographs. Yep, all of these are excellent answers. Yep, articles, art exhibits. This is great. So all of that is included. Conferences, yes, absolutely. I give people a little bit more time to throw up their ideas. And as people are putting their ideas in, you can see that there is no single clear theme or format. Twitter, absolutely. And we're going to get to Twitter in just a second. Workshop, yes, absolutely. Newspapers, yeah. And I mean, now we have newspapers in print, online. So I'll start putting up some of the other forms, and some of these have already been mentioned. So cartoons and comics are a great way to communicate science if you want to show a given scientific process. Sometimes we don't necessarily want to read a page description about something, but we'll we'll look at like a cartoon or a comic about it. We have newsletters or newspapers, like people have said, peer-reviewed articles and manuscripts, popular news articles, conference papers and posters, like people have said, short form videos. So this is getting really common now with like TikToks and Reels, where people are using that to sort of talk about different ideas in science. Also long form videos. So, and the recording of this talk, for example, can be considered a form of science communication. We also have movies, and there's a lot of movies out there that are themed around science. There's a big industry where they're specifically making movies about like space exploration or different topics like that. TV shows, like people have mentioned, workshops, science exhibits, blog posts, essays, graphics, photos. Someone asked if there's a way to save the chat. I assume it gets saved automatically.
I think the
Otherwise,
file does. Sorry, Risha. I think the file does, Rosalind. So if it pops up when the recordings are processed, I can drop them in the Slack.
yeah, otherwise I can also like copy it after and then just compile all the ideas together if that would be helpful. And then the last thing on this list is tweets. So going through Twitter, or I guess before that, you've seen that there are a lot of different forms. And before I dive into Twitter, I just want you to keep in mind what we talked about in terms of awareness, enjoyment, interest, opinion, and understanding, because all of these different forms will play very different roles and contributions to those responses. So for me, for example, reading a peer-reviewed article or an essay isn't necessarily going to give me a lot of enjoyment, but like scrolling through TikTok probably will. But in terms of understanding, I might get a much better understanding if I'm reading something that is more coherent than just, or like reading something that's more detailed and outlined and in like a scientific format than something that's just like a photo or a comic. So depending on, again, what your message is, who your audience is, you want to think about which forms are actually going to be the best way to get that message out there. So now we can move on to what Twitter is. And when you think of Twitter, what comes to mind? And also, does anyone actually use Twitter here already? I see one person. Politicians, okay, yeah. Hot takes, yes, definitely. Okay, you have Twitter but don't use it a lot. That's okay. Memes, there are a lot of memes, a lot of great memes. So Twitter is in short, a microblogging and social networking platform. Yep, it's a great platform to share your thoughts. I don't really use Twitter because it seems overwhelming, but I might after this. Well, we're gonna go through some tips on how to use Twitter, how to make the most of it, how to make the most of like science Twitter. And the simplest thing about Twitter is you use really short posts known as tweets to communicate. So rather than say LinkedIn, where people tend to post much longer posts, or let's say TikTok, where people are making more like videos, I would say that Twitter requires to some extent the least amount of effort because they're very short tweets. I think it's a 280 character max limit. I see someone found out about this from Twitter. That's great. And we'll talk about all the different things that's out there to discover on Twitter as well. And in terms of just some basic stats, there are 330 million monthly users and 206 million daily users globally. So obviously it's not everyone in the world that's on Twitter, but it is a lot of people that are out there. Every second, around 6,000 tweets are posted. So there's a ton of content being posted all the time. 23% of American adults use Twitter, and 83% of world leaders use Twitter. So I know someone mentioned politicians. So this also plays into the part about science communications shaping policy, because if you're tweeting a lot of stuff relating to science on Twitter, and there are a lot of world leaders and politicians on Twitter, it's much, you can raise awareness and bring attention to the things that you care about by people that might be very powerful. And in terms of some key terms, I know some people have said it's a little bit overwhelming or they're not on it. So I'm just going to go through some terms about what the Twitter sort of lingo is, so you might be more familiar with it and not as intimidated. So your timeline, which is what shows up when you first log on, is your social media feed. That includes tweets from the people you follow, tweets you might be interested in, as well as sponsored posts. A retweet is when you share a tweet that was originally posted by someone else. A quote tweet is when you share a tweet originally posted by someone else, but you add your own comment. A like is what you use to show that you like a tweet. Notifications show you the tweets that mention you, as well as replies, retweets, and likes for your posted tweets. A mention is when you mention someone using their Twitter handle. So if you look at the bottom right left of the screen, you'll see my Twitter handle. So if you mention me or include that in your tweet, it tags me in the tweet. And a few more terms, a hashtag is used to make it easier to find tweets with a common theme or based on a shared experience. So this could be a conference or a workshop like this one. And a list is you can create a list of users, and this list can be public or private, and you can use it to follow accounts related to a given topic without actually following the accounts themselves. So basically, I can create a list of, say, people who do neuroscience related work and just follow that list instead of following the individual people themselves. So I see someone's asked what type of content should we share to grow on Twitter, and we're going to get to that in just a second. Subtweeting is when you tweet about someone or something without explicitly stating it or tagging the related accounts. And this is also where sometimes like hot takes can come into play, or basically if there's something that you're not happy about or you want to complain, but you don't explicitly want to do it, this is a way that people do it. And live tweeting is when you're tweeting short summaries or reflections of an event as it is happening. So imagine if one of you were on Twitter right now and then just going through and posting the highlights of this, that would be an example of live tweeting, sorry. And then finally, a thread is a series of tweets on a given topic. So this is a lot of information that I've provided, but for it to be relevant at all, and before we can get to the content part of Twitter and the science communication part on Twitter, we need to make sure that we actually have a Twitter account. So I'm going to take a quick few minutes break here and leave up these instructions on how to set up a Twitter account. If you don't already have a Twitter account, I'd encourage you to take the next few minutes to follow these instructions and set one up. And if you do, feel free to take a quick break. And once you've all got an account, feel free to drop your Twitter handles or your usernames in the chat so we can all follow each other and you can set up a community already. So it's 34 after now. We can regroup at 40. So you'll have 5 minutes to set your Twitter up. Feel free to throw your handle in the chat, like I said. And if anyone has any questions on the stuff we've covered so far, I'm happy to take them right now. I'm gonna actually stop sharing so that I can pull up Twitter and start following people. I see Nikki has been playing around with lists. This is great to see people actually engaging. Trying to find everyone, but if I don't, feel free to follow me and I can find you that way as well. And for those of you who are just getting Twitter, it should also give you that option to discover people that you might be interested in and explore people sort of relating to different thoughts or sorry, different ideas. So feel free to use that to find people to follow as well. Share my screen again. So in case anyone needs the instructions, you can see that again. Right, we'll give it one more minute and then go through what Twitter actually, what using Twitter actually looks like and focus on sort of the science aspect of it. Also, I think this was mentioned in the chat, but if you haven't already, make sure you also follow Simply Neuroscience. All right, so I'm going to move on to the next section. And this is actually something that I've taken from this paper that it was from Cheplagina et al. From 2020. And they actually wrote this paper that was called 10 Simple Rules for Getting Started on Twitter as a Scientist. So I'm going to go through each rule or tip and summarize it and sort of provide my own perspective on it as well. But definitely check out the paper if you're interested. I can put it in the chat later. Because some of what I'm saying is different from what the authors have focused on in this paper itself. So let's go through the list. First of all, you got to start somewhere, but you need to make sure you show up. So this was the first step of what we've already done, setting up a Twitter account. So once you've got an account, it's great if you want to immediately dive in and start tweeting, or you can take some time to get familiarized with the platform and how people use it. So a great way to do this, like many of you have already done, is find people to follow, find accounts that you care about, find different causes or issues that you care about. Usually, like most institutions have their accounts, most scientific organizations have their accounts. And then there are also just like a lot of different like people that post funny like science related stuff. Even if you were to do a simple Google search that was like, okay, like funniest academic scientist to follow on Twitter or something, I guarantee you'll get lists of lots of recommendations on who to follow. Or if you care about a specific topic in neuroscience, you can find people related to that. And then when you are ready to tweet, I mentioned before that Twitter is very short form. So know that what you're tweeting does not have to be polished, and you don't necessarily need to know everything about a topic to be able to tweet about it. So because they're so short, it's relatively easy and quick to post something. And it's, for me, sometimes it's as simple as posting like a photo of like somewhere that I'm traveling, or you can post a cute photo of your pet, a project that you're working on, or a cool fact that you just learned. So start anywhere, but as long as you're showing up on Twitter, it's a great way to build your following and your community. So Twitter is a great place to discover opportunities in academia. And I see some people are sharing other Twitter handles as well, so feel free to check those out and follow them. So going back to this idea of discovering opportunities in academia, Twitter is a great place to learn about academic and scientific opportunities. Many researchers are active on Twitter and use it to advertise jobs across all career stages in their labs and institutions. Because a lot of people know that a lot of scientists use Twitter, I've now seen a lot of companies outside of academia also that are looking to hire scientists advertise their positions on Twitter. So it definitely doesn't hurt to get on there and just be active, see what's out there. Apart from jobs, it's also where people tend to share the research projects they're working on, the grants they're putting together, any research ideas they have, different programs that their schools might be offering. And it could be for high school students, like even like outreach initiatives for like younger students, opportunities for undergrads. So there's a lot of different things that people will be sharing on Twitter. And if you're following the right accounts that might be tweeting things that are related to you, you're likely to find something that either it's something that you want to apply to, someone that you want to work with, and things like that. Tweet stuff. So that's basically as simple as it sounds. And remember that not all of it has to be original content. We talked about retweeting, quote tweeting. You can do any of those. If you find something that's a cool post, you can just share it. Like you can retweet it. You can be like, oh, this is something that's really interesting, and quote tweet it. You can also just share a link to something else with a quick sentence of what it's about. But try to get into the habit of communicating via Twitter. And another way to do this, if you don't want to necessarily just retweet other stuff or like quote tweet, post your own stuff, you can also respond to tweets. So someone might have posted something that's really cool that they did. You can congratulate them on it. Someone might be studying something that you're interested or in a program that you're interested in. You can always reach out to ask them about it, share a similar experience, and so on. You also want to make sure that you learn the rules. So there are no concrete rules for Twitter, but there are general, so like sort of socially accepted standards. And we went through some of the basic terms about Twitter and just use those in general life, social media, just general etiquette when using the platform. So what does that mean? Be nice, don't be mean. As with any other platform or real life, you don't want to use it as a platform where you're going to attack individuals or their views or anything like that. If you are working at an institution or part of an institution, sometimes they'll have specific guidelines on what you should and shouldn't say on Twitter, and just like a disclaimer saying that what you're saying on Twitter is not representative of that institution or organization. And make sure you're also crediting other people if you're sharing their ideas or work. And generally, it's just like be a nice person on Twitter. Relating to that, take care of yourself, because Twitter can be a particularly toxic place because it is very easy to be mean and hide behind an anonymous account. There's a lot of content that's being produced and shared all the time. So use Twitter as often as you want to, but don't feel pressured to be on it all the time. Twitter also has a block feature if you just do not want to see anything related to an account at all. So you can totally use that. They also have a mute feature if you're, say, following someone, you don't necessarily want to block them, but you just don't want to see the stuff that they're posting on your timeline. Both of those are excellent features, and don't be afraid to use them. You can block people, you can mute people. You don't have to see every single thing that's posted on Twitter if it's not going to be good for you. And at the end of the day, remember that Twitter is a social media platform. And as with all the other ones out there, it can create an unreasonable expectation or set of standards on what we think people are doing. We often tend to share only the best parts or the highlights of our lives on Twitter, but we neglect to share the not so great parts. So just be aware that what you're seeing on Twitter isn't necessarily 100% representative of reality, or it's not capturing the entirety of someone's reality. So now let's get to some of the funner stuff, which is build your community. So one of the great things about Twitter is you can choose who you want to follow and what content you want to see. We've already gotten that started with creating these accounts, starting to follow people, but know that you don't have to follow someone just because they follow you. You don't have to follow an account just because they are like a famous scientist or whatever it is. You can very much curate your feed and your Twitter community to what you want it to be. So for some people, that may mean having a private account and only allowing their friends to follow them. For other people, it might mean having a more public account that's a mix of their professional lives or their academic lives, or some sort of mix of their personal and professional lives. So really feel free to personalize your experience to make it what you need to be. And you can also change that at any point. So if you might have a very public Twitter for a while, but then you might decide you don't want to keep the same thing and you want to switch to a private account, you can always do that. You can also specifically seek out people in your area of interest, in your organization or institution, places that you think are cool. You might just be someone that wants to see a lot of like science related videos. You can totally just find accounts and follow them. You might just be interested in seeing a lot of like photos of people's pets. You can totally do that. So really build your own community and customize Twitter to what you need it to be. The next thing you want to think about is interface with real life. So Twitter is a great way to network with people that you may or may not meet in real life, or you've already met in real life. So today you might have just created an account and followed someone, but at some point in the future, you might actually end up meeting someone that you followed today at a conference or a workshop or an organizational event or something like that. And it's a great way if you are going to, let's say, a new school or a new program or a new conference, it's a great way to see who's actually going to be attending and connect with people beforehand. While you're there, it's also a great way to share what your experiences are, see what other people's experiences are. And then after this event or this new program or this new job, it's a great way to follow people that you've met and sort of keep that connection going. Next, you want to spread your message. So use Twitter to share things that you care about or you're proud of. So this could be writing an essay for school, getting a research internship, or getting into a school or a program of your choice. You can tweet about any of those things. It also doesn't have to be just about science. You might have gotten like a new pet. You might be competing in a track meet and like won a medal, or you might have started this new volunteer position at a organization that you really care about. Anything that you care about and you want to share, you can do that through Twitter, and it's very quick and easy to do that. Next, you want to be a real person. So there are a lot of accounts out there that are run by organizations or by different people that are meant to be representative of a specific, either like the viewpoints of an organization, or let's say like a meme account or different things like that. But if you're using it as a scientist for you or someone who's interested in science, you can be a real person on Twitter. And this doesn't mean that you have to share a lot of things about your personal life or your personality on Twitter, but it doesn't hurt to show that you're human. So if you're using it for a professional sense, you can choose to use your actual name. You can choose to have your photo as the actual profile picture. And you can do all that, but still not share that much information about your personal life on it. And also know that no one is expecting you to be a science communicator or a scientist or a student or an athlete or whatever it is all the time. So you can deviate from this. You can basically curate this Twitter account to be exactly the personality that you want it to be, and just share that you're like a real person. So sometimes I like to post about like non-science books that I'm reading, or like a concert that I'm going to, or like someplace that I traveled. And it just basically shows people out there that like I am a real person. Like I'm not just a scientist, or I'm not just like the work that I'm doing. And relating to some of the other stuff that we talked about earlier, a great way to humanize yourself is also to share your failures. So this could be maybe you didn't get a research internship that you really wanted to do, or you didn't get into the school or program that you wanted. That's okay. And it's becoming more and more common for people to share things like that on Twitter so that you can get support from your Twitter community. But also a lot of times people might be able to offer advice or offer alternatives that you might be interested in. And lastly, with great power comes great responsibility. So something to know about Twitter is it's a great equalizer. It doesn't matter if you are a super famous scientist in the field or a student that's just getting into it, or let's say like a super well-known politician. If you have the same amount of followers on Twitter, essentially your reach or the amount of people that your message gets out to can be the same. So once you get to that level where let's say you have like a few hundred or 1,000 followers, your message is getting out to a lot of people that you won't necessarily just be having a conversation with 1,000 people at once, but on Twitter, you can be doing exactly that. And know that because there is that power that you can have, there is also responsibility. So be responsible with what you're tweeting about. If it's not something you wouldn't want to share in a professional setting, don't put it on Twitter. And also don't spread misinformation, don't be mean, don't spread negativity. You can play a very active role in communicating science and shaping what people think is cool or interesting or appropriate. So just be mindful of that as you grow your following. You can also use this power to lift up others who are getting onto Twitter and help those that are new to Twitter get visibility and a following as well. And there's actually a lot of accounts that are dedicated to this and organize things like Follow Friday. So if you follow, I think, Academic Chatter, or I think it's like Open Science, Open Academics, I can put some of those in the chat afterwards. A lot of times they'll have things like every week that's like, okay, post something like quick about yourself. And then the goal is that it's just promoting a lot of people who are new to Twitter or like young scientists, so then they can get to know each other and follow each other. So there's lots of opportunities to grow that following to get to this place where you have a lot of followers too. So we've talked a little bit about SciComm and a little bit about Twitter and gone through tips on how to use Twitter effectively, but I still haven't really told you why should you actually use Twitter for your science communication. So this is a list that was put together by Simon Fraser University on specifically why Twitter is a great place for academics. So it makes your research more accessible across disciplines, sectors, and to the general public. And most research is funded in some way or another by the public anyways. So as scientists, we need to make sure that we are communicating our research and fundings as well as opportunities in science. So for that reason, Twitter is a great place to talk about your science, make sure it's getting out to the broader public, but also let people know about the opportunities to get involved with your science. It's a great way, like we said, to contribute to dispelling misinformation and disinformation. So there's a lot of information out there that's always being posted on Twitter, but not all of it is true or validated. And Twitter is a great place to sort of have those conversations, dispel some of the misinformation or disinformation that's out there, and boost the more reliable sources of information that's out there. Next, build a network. So we've already talked about this a bit, but Twitter is a great way to amplify your work and your interests and establish yourself as an expert in your particular area of interest. If you're a young scientist, this can lead to potential jobs as like research assistants or potential programs that you can apply to or potential funding opportunities. In later stages, it can lead to like more collaborations, speaking engagements, funding, citations, and so on. And there's a lot that you can do through it. And again, you can very much customize it to be what you need it to be. It's also a great place to raise awareness about issues, needs, concerns, and opportunities. So if you care about a given topic or issue, Twitter is a great place to start conversations about this because it might not be something that someone else is thinking about, but you can easily post something about it. A bunch of people might see something and be like, oh, that's super cool. We want to do something about that, and just lead to a group effort where otherwise that might not have been the case. Relatedly, you can also use it to inspire action. So this relates to that previous point, but also our conversation about practical outcomes. By using Twitter, you can get your message out there and potentially inform policy, practice, and research. And the more people know about this issue that you care about, your work, your expertise, the more opportunity you have to contribute to a positive, meaningful change. Twitter is also a great place to learn about topics that you're interested in. So you can specifically search for accounts, topics, or people that interest you and use that to stay up to date, stay informed, get engaged, seek out new opportunities. And finally, it's a great place to recruit students, staff, and study participants. So by sharing your opportunities widely, you can increase who's seeing these posts. And often it has a much larger reach than, say, like a flyer on a bulletin board at your school or like a blurb in an email. And I know several of you said you found this event through Twitter as well. So I can see obviously it's working. And something that I'd like to share for me personally is like my current job, I got it through Twitter. Because I am relatively lazy, I would say. I didn't want to apply for jobs. So instead I posted a thread on Twitter about the fact that I was looking for a job. And through that, I had multiple people reach out to me about like what they were looking for, and like it ended up working out. Several of my colleagues right now also got their jobs through Twitter. So it's not like an isolated event. I think it's becoming more and more common, and especially in science. Whether you're looking for research assistant positions, different sort of summer opportunities to get involved, different courses you might want to take, would definitely recommend. And as you're thinking about all of these things, just keep in mind that all this communication that you're trying to do somehow, again, relates back to what we talked about for awareness, enjoyment, interest, opinion, and understanding. So I see someone has said, is there any Twitter handle you'd like to recommend for us to get updated about opportunities and that can be helpful to learn something? So a few days ago, actually, I posted on Twitter asking about a list of accounts that might be helpful for you all to follow as part of this workshop. And I will share a link to that tweet so that you can see the different people that were recommended. And lastly, we've talked a lot about basically what science communication is, what Twitter is, why you should use Twitter. And I just want to end up by having a little conversation, I know we're close to the end of time, about what science communication might actually look like on Twitter. So for me personally, I've posted about a book that I'm reading, or I'll summarize the findings of my research study, or I've written threads about like tips for like grant writing or like writing applications for grad school or abstracts. I've also tried to figure out like why something isn't working. So just being like, this is what I'm working on, I'm struggling, can someone help me? And then often I've been able to sort of get help that way. You can also propose ideas for a workshop or symposium and find collaborators or find things to participate in. Something that's getting more common is sharing your science themed art. So there are a lot of science focused artists out there that use Twitter to really just showcase their work. You can advertise your research study and recruit participants, which is something that I've done. And something that's becoming more common, especially given the large presence of politicians and policymakers, is with a lot of science-related policies and laws being very prominent in the news, you can use it to really talk about what that means from a scientific perspective and help people understand and become aware about how this might be affecting their lives. So I'm going to just go to the next slide in the interest of time. But really quickly, I had some examples of good, basically examples of effective science communication. So I'm going to try to open some of these, and let me just change my. Here, I'm just going to open all of them. Give me one quick second while I figure out the best way to do this. I'm just going to open all the links and then I'll share my screen again. But in the meantime, if anyone has any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. All right, let me just share my screen again. That should work. So we can start from the beginning here. So this is an example of something that I thought was a great way to share information on Twitter. So this person just put together a screenshot of sort of some of the words that they'd included on things that they include in when writing essays or any form of writing. And it's just, okay, you're struggling with how to start your introduction. Great, here's a list of some of the things you can do. You might be struggling with words to use instead of because. Simple. And I thought that was just like a great way. This is something that this person has clearly thought a lot about, and they just put together something super straightforward. This one here is what we talked about for comics. So this is an account where specifically they post comics relating to science in graduate school. So it's nothing crazy, but it's something that they've created as their identity of how they're going to communicate, not necessarily scientific content, but more about the process of being a scientist or the process of science on Twitter. This is another account that posts really cool stuff. It's Sketching Science, and they actually use different sketches and animations to communicate their research. So I'm not going to go through all of it, but you can see it's really informative, like visual animations, but it's accompanied by text so people can sort of understand how it relates to the actual science part that they're hoping to communicate. This is someone who I believe he's a doctor. Yes, he's a doctor, and a lot of times if he's reading a paper, he'll just post a quick summary on what the findings actually are, include some figures from it, and sort of like relate it to some of the other stuff. And especially with COVID, I think he got like really popular just talking about the different implications of different studies, different sort of findings and how they all relate to one another. This one here is just a thread of like giving advice on different mistakes that people make when applying for different grants. So just a simple text thread, doesn't have to include a lot of graphics or anything like that, but just going through and giving people some general advice. This here is from one of the organizations that I'm a part of, and every year at this annual meeting, they organize a bunch of different events. So here they were just putting together a thread of all the different events that they had planned, sort of like what to expect, how to register, super straightforward, just like that. This was another thread from that same conference, but this was one of my friends who was actually live tweeting an event that was happening. So it was a podcast that was being recorded live. And it was specifically about this paper that had recently been published. So they started off by, this is what's happening, just quote tweeting the original post advertising the event so people would know what it was about, relating the paper, and then just basically throughout the event, taking things that people said so that for someone who might not be attending or for someone who was attending and just wanted a quick summary of it afterwards, they could get a pretty easy and coherent summary of the entire event through that. I just have a couple more. So this one here is a Lego grad student who posts a bunch of stuff that's basically Lego based art about experiences in science. And they have a bunch of different ones. So again, this one's more related to the process of science rather than science content, but again, it's still very much science communication. This person here, so this relates to those of you who might not quite feel comfortable tweeting your own stuff yet. What they actually did is they just took some of the most helpful tweets that they found or some of the most helpful threads and put it all together in one. So if you're looking for applying for jobs, this is the post that you should look at. If you're on the job market, if you're looking to write a book, if you're looking for Chrome extensions. So they're all very distinct topics that people might be interested in, but it's a great way to just compile a lot of information without necessarily having to post a lot of original content yourself. And lastly, I talked about looking for different opportunities. So before I was at my current job, I was at Cornell, and they organize a bunch of different events relating to different audiences, different sort of like activities. And a lot of times you'll find stuff like this on Twitter where they're just advertising, okay, if this is who you are, you're applying to graduate school, this is something you're considering, this is the event, this is what you can expect, and like this is how to apply. So if you're following different accounts or different institutions that you might be interested in, this is a great way to find out about it as well. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing. I see some questions here. Let me just try and get to those. I know we're running 6 minutes over, so I apologize for that. Yes, so Ankit, I see that you asked about how to share through Twitter. I hope the examples that I just went through were helpful. If not, feel free to reach out to me. And if there are specific things that you're looking to share, I can help you shape that as well. And I see someone asked, what are the top neuro hashtags you all like? I can't think of any off the top of my head, but there are a lot relating to specific, say like conferences or specific like areas of research. Like if you look at, I think like hashtag neuro grad student or like hashtag psych grad student, hashtag neuro Twitter, things like that, you'll find a lot. And sometimes if you go to some of the larger, more broader academic related Twitters, they'll also tag specific accounts that are then relating to the topic that you might be interested in. And I'll give people a couple more minutes if they have questions. I'll find that tweet that I was looking to share. And I hope you all found this helpful. And I encourage you to use Twitter in whichever way you find most helpful, but I would definitely recommend it. This is the thread that I was talking about. There are lots of different responses to that tweet about different people that you might want to follow. Rather than put together a curated list on my end, I figured it might be better if you all have sort of the opportunity to explore those accounts on your own. And then again, once you're following a bunch of people, Twitter will also just tell you which other related accounts you want to follow. I see someone said I just missed all of the handles. If you're talking about the ones from the people in this session, if you scroll up in the chat, they should be up there. And if you were interested in, let me actually just do one other thing. If you're interested in the ones that I shared as examples, I can share this slide so that you all can see that as well. I hope this is the slide that you're talking about. And these were just some examples of their tweets. If you just find the accounts, a lot of them specifically do a lot of this thing like very common or very like regularly. So even if it's not that specific tweet, you'll definitely find lots of great examples of great tweets on these accounts. I'm glad you all found it helpful. If there's any other questions, I can give it another couple minutes. Again, I apologize for going over time. Let's just see if it'll let me do this. Oh, there. The links disappeared, but the account names are all there. So you can always use that as well to find those accounts. Is there anything else? Or should we wrap it up?
Yeah, if no one has any more questions, I think we'll wrap it up there. Thank you again for coming. We're really sorry we ran over just now, but your presentation was really, really good. And I think I'm definitely going to use Twitter more now. And I just actually made my Twitter account unprivate, so maybe I'll get to reach more people that way. So yeah,
yeah,
thank
whatever
you
you're
again.
comfortable with.
Yeah, yeah. I probably won't tweet as much. I'll just like a lot of posts. Yeah.
Yeah. I
Great.
just like to scroll, again, I'm lazy. I like scrolling. I like seeing what people are up to.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah, Twitter's a really free platform. I really like it that way. So yeah, thank you so much for coming. And we really thank you for everything you've taught us today. And yeah, we're going to end the recording there. Thank you so much.
Thanks everyone for attending. If you have any